This is a production of PBS Charlotte.
There was a time when if you needed something, you either found someone with the skills to make it, or you made it yourself. If you needed nails, you went to the blacksmith. If you needed cornmeal, you went to a grist mill. And if you needed a bed, you'd visit a furniture maker. They are the skills and techniques seemingly lost in the modern world. But if you look for them, you'll find dedicated local craftspeople who still value doing things the old-fashioned way. Join us as we explore historic trades and crafts right here on Trail of History. Handcrafted, old-fashioned, and the good old days, all terms that might hearken us back to the past, a past when things were supposedly easier. The reality? If you made things with your hands prior to the advent of the assembly line, things were far from easy. But the people who took raw materials, labored away, and created useful items, they were the essential members of a community. Today, we live in the on-demand world. But if you look for them, you might just find the folks who still cherish and honor the essential workers of yesteryear and how things were done in the good old days. With each blow of the hammer, a blacksmith connects with the past. This profession dates back more than 3,000 years to ancient Egypt, and just as it did then, this craft still takes skill and intuition.
It's a very romanticized profession or craft. It's a lot of hot, hard, frustrating, failure-filled work.
Master welder Jason Blanchett owns Iron Giant Fabrication and Welding. Most days you'll find him creating high-end architectural features.
The majority of our work consists of commercial and residential projects, restaurants and salons and things of that nature. Most of it's architectural ironwork with a high-end level of design and usually a higher than average level of fabrication techniques and things of that nature.
Blanchett initially started down the traditional college path, but decided to learn a trade instead. He enrolled in the Central Piedmont Community College welding program and took a deep dive into high-tech fabrication. It also made blacksmithing seem archaic.
The blacksmithing is different from those things. Initially, I thought it was pretty silly. Like, why would you, with all this technology we have CNC and all this stuff, why would you do this? Like, why would you hammer something? We have, 5-axis, all these machines and stuff. Like, why would you do that?
Early on in his welding career, his thoughts on the craft started to change when a mentor introduced him to blacksmithing. It's a skill he continues to perfect. Several times a year, Blanchett gives demonstrations in the blacksmith shop at Charlotte's historic Rosedale. It's through his demonstrations visitors learn just how critically important a blacksmith was to a community.
One, it connects you to a time that's not here anymore. Like where you go to a blacksmith for hinges, you go to a blacksmith for a hammer, you go to a blacksmith for a nail, you go to, all this stuff, locks and things of that nature. You couldn't lock anything without getting somebody to make you a lock.
Lumps of coal fuel the forge here at Rosedale, and Blanchett's assistant Luke gets a workout on the bellows, constantly pumping air to feed oxygen to the fire. It takes a certain finesse and instinct.
Coal gets a lot hotter, a lot faster. So where you have a gas forge where you turn it on and air-gas mixture is already going, you don't have to do anything to manipulate that. And this, you're always manipulating the firebox. You're incorporating new coal, you're taking out the clinkers and the used pieces out, and you're kind of massaging how much of this heat you're going to use and then isolating it in your workpiece.
The work requires resilience and resolve to finish what you started.
Because you can get 7 steps into something and have to start right over if you don't follow your process or the rules that you've learned. Something breaks, put another piece in the fire and get right back on it.
But here at Rosedale, Blanchett is not only sharing his trade, he's helping to tell the full story of Rosedale and similar historic farms in the American South. Prior to the Civil War, much of the skilled labor in the South was that of the enslaved, and many of those African Americans became highly skilled in trades like carpentry, masonry, and blacksmithing. In the 1800s, it was the African Americans who worked the original forge here at Rosedale.
Blacksmithing gave the slave communities a higher or an elevated level of existence. They had a little bit more social capital. They had more social capital, period, because you couldn't get a lock, a nail, or a hammer, or a hinge without them. So they were going to have a little bit more power and a little bit more sway. In fact, the grandsons of this farm went on to start a shop in North Davison.
Blanchett doesn't consider himself a reenactor or even a historian, but he feels a connection to the history here at Rosedale.
I feel like this was my way of engaging in the history and also keeping something alive that wouldn't have legs without me a little bit. Maybe not without me, but without a person of African American descent, because it does lend legitimacy to the whole storytelling.
Blanchett knows that he's keeping a craft alive, but he says there's another benefit.
I'm charged every day to know exactly what I'm making, to have it down to the detail, the 16th or the 64th or the 32nd, or the finish quality or the anchoring necessities for something. I'm kind of ruled by a lot of numbers and stuff. So here, the kind of how I go about this is a very free-flowing, personal expression kind of deal, where I try to communicate the techniques and stuff that are used and what I'm doing in general, but then just to let it be free, more free than what I get to express in my day-to-day fabrication and building.
So on your next visit to Rosedale, stop by the smithy and you just might see Blanchett hammering away in a creative symphony of iron, fire, and brute force, all while helping share the full story of this historic site and this centuries-old craft. In eastern Cabarrus County, up on a hill, stands a weather-worn building surrounded by pieces of an agricultural past. Pieces representing 8 generations of one family's farming legacy here at the Bost Grist Mill historic site. The purr of an antique Alice Chalmers tractor radiates from the mill building.
Can't use a John Deere though.
Why not?
Putt-putt. You can't use a putt-putt. It's got to run real smooth. You can't have something that's going to jerk it.
The mill started out on the nearby Rocky River, where water powered its operation. But over a century ago, flooding forced a move and more modern power sources.
At first it was steam powered with a steam engine. And then later on they went to a gasoline engine.
And as the classic tractor warms up, the 6th generation mill owner, Gene Bost, inspects and prepares the mill's inner workings.
We just make sure everything's in working order. The belts, you make sure they're not going to be slipping. Once it's started, that's the hard part. Once it's started, you can run all day long.
Running the mill requires a bit of help from Gene's son Brant. He represents the 7th generation. Giving it a bit of gas, Brant throttles up the tractor to power this small pulley. It drives a wide belt that turns this massive pulley that then spins round and round, in turn transferring the tractor's energy to the various belts and gears under the building. It's a lot to keep track of.
And what I do is just sit there and watch it in case something happens. I mean, there's a lot of older stuff and that's going on. Anything can happen, anything can come apart. So we just kind of watch out and be ready to stop it in a hurry, get it started, get it stopped. That's my main role, and I kind of keep an eye on underneath.
But the real magic happens on the inside.
We're making cornmeal. We put it in the machine, in the mill. The mill is 2 sets of stones. It was going down through in the center of those stones, getting in between them, it was crushing it. You can adjust your stones. The lower, tighter you get them, the finer it gets. The wider you get it, the coarser it gets. If you want grits and cornmeal, the same thing about it, except that's how coarse it's ground.
The ground cornmeal flows down this wooden chute into a vibrating screen, which further refines the product.
It takes out your good product, puts it in that bin, and on the end where it's running out, that is actually it's the outside portion of the corn, the outside layer. It's called a bran, and that's coming out into a bag there, and maybe some little particles or anything that didn't grind comes out there, and it's fed back to animals. It's not wasted.
And the finished cornmeal ends up in the bin underneath the sifter. Most agricultural communities at one time had a mill. Area farmers would bring their corn and other grains to be ground into products such as flour, cornmeal, and grits.
Usually the farmer brings his own grain in, usually on Saturday. And they would be lined up. I've heard stories they'd be lined up a couple hundred yards.
But with the industrialization of farming and modern food distribution like grocery store chains, mills like the historic Bost Grist Mill became obsolete. Or did it? Today, instead of milling for other farmers, the Bost family preserves their mill by opening it to the public on Saturdays. They run a small country store inside, offering their own fresh ground cornmeal and other products. And it's in the other products category where the 8th generation Bost steps in. Meet 12-year-old Graydon Bost.
We carry all different kinds of sausage. We carry mild sausage, Cajun sausage, mild with extra sage. We carry all kinds. We do pork chops, we do bacon, and a couple other little things.
And to get those delicious products, Graydon is continuing a different Bost family farming tradition, raising free-range pigs.
My grandpa done them, and then his daddy done it, and just a legacy.
One thing is for certain, this young entrepreneur is all business.
Now, you understand they're not pets.
Oh yeah,
You know,
they're bacon and sausage. It ain't the easiest job, but some days it goes good and some days it don't.
The main reason we started this pig thing too is we care about what people eat, just trying to do it right, because we care about what people get a hold of. It's not really the profit we're making, it's just we care.
Farm life will never be called an easy life, but here on the Bost Historic Grist Mill and Farm, it can be summed up as a good life.
I wouldn't take nothing for the experience. I have a love for the land, and like I said, it gets in your blood, and I've even asked Daddy, I said, you know, why do we do this? He said, it's in your blood, boy. A lot of people ask me, say, why don't you just, go to the beach, spend more time? But when you sit here, it means more to you to see and look what your family worked for, and then you work for it, and you see the rewards at the end. That's what means the most to me.
On a chilly night, many find comfort snuggling under a warm quilt. These handcrafted treasures are often passed down through the generations. But before you can hand down or even get comfy under that quilt, someone has to know how to make it. Someone like longtime quilter Jane Godshell.
When you make a quilt, you put 3 fabrics together. You have your top layer, your batting, and then the backing. And then you sew through all 3 layers, and that makes a quilt.
The technique of quilting dates back thousands of years, but just a couple hundred years ago, as American pioneering families moved west and further away from the nearest general store, quilting proved to be an essential skill.
The 1800s definitely, because you had a much greater movement in the country, and they needed the warmth as they went. So yeah, again, it became a necessity that they had to have bed coverings.
Those early pioneering women were resourceful, and little went to waste.
The pioneer women would do them by, candlelight, and put every bit of scrap that they could find from old clothing or whatever into it.
In the early 20th century, the resourceful spirit continued as a new source of cloth came into vogue.
Farmers and companies got onto this real quick that women needed fabric. So feed sacks came into being where they would actually be printed. They'd come in, whether it was, your hog feed or your corn or flour or whatever, it would come in a fabric. So women would use that.
When it comes to quilts, there's a wide range of style and purpose.
There's handwork, there's machine work, there's modern quilts, there's traditional quilts, there's just all kinds. Quilts could be political. That was a big thing that started in this country during the times of women's suffrage. There were a lot of quilts made about that.
But eventually, the need to make quilts diminished with modern manufacturing. Then another shift, a societal shift.
Women were going back to work in the sort of in the 50s, but definitely in the 60s and 70s. There were more careers happening out there, and then women who had careers and had families to take care of. So the time was just not there.
Jane says it was around the American Bicentennial in 1976 when quilting went from essential skill to more of a hobby and craft.
People got interested again, and that's when, as far as documentation goes, it became more of an industry.
These days, Jane is a member of 2 local quilting guilds and shares her years of knowledge at various quilt shows. Her longtime friend and fellow guild member, Teresa Justice, was first exposed to quilting by her mother, but it wasn't until the 1990s when she got serious about the craft.
I like to think of myself as a traditional quilter.
Teresa put her skills to use after discovering a forgotten family heirloom.
Okay, that is a what they call a postage stamp quilt. It's made up of 1-inch blocks. And my husband's Aunt Gertrude actually made that all by hand.
But Teresa says Aunt Gertrude left this one with a bit of work.
She gave it to my mother-in-law, who put it in a closet for many years, and I discovered it one day at her house, and I asked her if I could take it home and finish it for her.
And finish it she did. Today, this quilt made up of tiny squares is a cherished multi-generational heirloom. Quilters like Teresa and Jane say it's hard for them to not quilt.
I seriously can't just sit and watch a movie. I need to be knitting or sewing or doing something because I feel like I'm wasting time otherwise, and this is something I love to do.
But it's not just about the history of the craft or the quilts themselves. There's more going on here.
Other quilters are my closest friends, and you get close, it's like sisters.
Over in York, South Carolina, from the outside, this small, unassuming shop might not draw much attention to those passing by. But there are clear signs something special is going on inside. Welcome to Leek Furniture Makers.
Together every day, making reproduction furniture right here in our town where we've lived and loved for all these years. And so we're just happy as heck to be here.
Meet furniture maker John Leek, and the we part of the equation, his son Jay. Together they make finely crafted furniture with attention to every detail.
We make a lot of different types of furniture here. I guess the common theme to it, most of it would be what we would call backwoods, rural type. Typical of what you would find in, say, the Piedmont of South Carolina. Versus more urban areas, say like Charleston or even Atlanta. We love to use beautiful wood, and we try to join it up carefully, and so everything else sort of takes care of itself.
The duo put an emphasis on craftsmanship over speed, using traditional methods.
We still have a mortise and tenon joint, still very strong, still very traditional, still nothing better.
But labor intensive.
This would be an example of a twin mortise and tenon right here. This is a 4-step process for us. So it's sped up considerably with machinery that we use, but this is still a very, very, very traditional joint.
They average about a dozen pieces a year, each custom ordered, and each constructed to customers' specs. The Leeks find design inspiration in traditional styles dating to early America. At the time of our visit to the shop, they were hard at work constructing a hunt board.
The hunt boards were found predominantly in the Piedmont area here in the Carolinas and down into Georgia. So we were right in the mainstream of the hunt board here. And the hunt board is a pretty unique piece. It really what it amounts to is a serving piece. It's essentially a tall table. The one that we're doing here is based off of an original that was made and documented up in Virginia. Now Virginia is a little bit far north for a hunt board, but this original did come from up there. The one that we are adapted from was in a collection in Richmond.
This particular hunt board will find its way to Charleston, and it's the younger Leek's job to add a bit of embellishment with custom inlay.
I enjoy the inlay work, and I've been getting ready to put in an inlay, which is a palmetto tree that we have scrolled out.
For years, many of their pieces stayed close to home, but a feature article in a lifestyle magazine about their version of a cellarette introduced the Leeks to a much larger audience.
When that magazine article came out, we started getting emails and calls from all over the country. And next thing you know, we had, in the first couple of days of that article coming out, we probably had 25 or 30 orders all over the country.
Through their well-earned notoriety, they even received orders for a series of small custom boxes from the White House, used to present foreign dignitaries with gifts. But the spotlight hasn't changed how these two craftsmen work, staying humble.
There's so much to learn in the world of woodworking and furniture making, and you'll never learn it all.
And focused on tradition and family.
Well, I enjoy being in the shop, side by side with Dad. You know, it's just I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
In our shop, making a piece of furniture is not a job, it's a way of life here. And so we just take that incredibly serious, that somebody has given us the honor and the privilege of making something for them.
With his sweetgrass supplies at the ready, Jeremy Smalls puts in the work needed to turn his craft into a business.
I am the proud owner of 1721 Creations, Charleston Sweetgrass Baskets.
Creations ranging from decorative to utilitarian.
A lot of people use the baskets for fruit bowl, for candy dishes. This small basket right here is actually one of my #1 sellers. This basket right here actually goes on the wall and you place a small candle on the inside. So baskets can be used for several different things. I make wreaths, I make purses, I make everything. I always tell people to get a decent sized basket and a nice basket. I think $100 is a safe net. So this small keychain here is $10. There's a basket that my grandmother made that's actually on the banner here. That basket's $7.50. These baskets can go higher than that because it's a very time-consuming craft.
But he says it's an investment in quality.
One thing I love to tell customers is these baskets last a lifetime. A lifetime. When you go visit Charleston, a lot of the sweetgrass baskets are in downtown Charleston on King Street, Meeting Street, and Market Street. In Mount Pleasant, we have that Highway 17.
Jeremy, a Charleston, South Carolina native, learned to weave sweetgrass baskets from his late grandmother.
I started this craft when I was 12 years old. And with that being said, I've continued this family legacy for over 18 years.
His family's legacy is rooted in a centuries-old tradition, first introduced to the South Carolina Low Country by enslaved West Africans who worked the numerous rice plantations. On the plantations, they would utilize the abundant natural materials around them to weave baskets similar to those in their native Africa. After emancipation and the end of slavery in the American South, many of the formerly enslaved formed communities on the coastal islands of the Low Country. The people became known as Gullah, and it's their descendants who continue the basket weaving tradition, drawing upon the region's natural resources for their supplies.
The materials are all grown naturally. So here is the palmetto. This comes from the South Carolina state tree, the palmetto tree. And then you also have sweetgrass, which is a lighter colored material that's a bit softer here. So this is sweetgrass right here, and this grows in the first part of the marshes. And you have bulrush and russia, which grows in the second part of the marsh. It is extremely tedious. This right here is a very small keychain. This right here is extremely painful on my hand. A lot of individuals do not realize that the smaller the basket, the more painful it is on the hand. When you have something as large as like this, with this particular basket, is not as painful. But the smaller the basket, the more painful it is on the hand. It's a very tedious craft. No two basket makers make the same basket. The second I do a stitch in a different position than the first position, the basket's different. So no two baskets are ever the same. The basket weaver can be the same, but even our craft would not be the same of our same product.
Jeremy started his business as a way to honor his late grandmother.
1721 Creations is my company's name. 1721 is the address where my grandmother lived at in Charleston. And it was important for me to where when you see my name for my business, it's a story. When you hear 1721 Creations, nothing about that says sweetgrass baskets. So it's a story. Someone will say, where did 1721 Creations come from? I'm now able to talk about my grandmother, the late Mary Alice Venning Vanderhorst.
But there's more to his motivation.
So I'm a leader within my community in doing these Charleston sweetgrass baskets. It's very important for me to keep this craft within our house. So going back to those African slave descendants who started this craft over 300 years ago, this was something that we were able to take pride in for us. But the sweetgrass baskets is something that was defined by African Americans. That's why it's important for me to ensure that I keep this legacy alive. I'm building a foundation for this story to continue to keep going, and that is within my African American family culture.
Honoring one's heritage can take many forms, but when you watch a craftsperson at work, it's hard not to see the passion. It's a commitment to creating and continuing the techniques of the past. By practicing these age-old skills, crafts, and ways of life, these individuals ensure the methods of our ancestors, the essential work of their past, live on for future generations. Thank you for watching this episode of Trail of History.
A production of PBS Charlotte.